points.
No, we're not getting down to play.
Right.
Sorry. Nope.
It's not going to go well. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew, and today I'm going to be giving you a speech on the origin of American football. Did you guys catch the Super Bowl last Sunday? By halftime, it looked like the Ravens were going to destroy the 49ers. By the third quarter, 49ers started catching up, but it just wasn't enough. They still lost 34-31. That was the 47th Super Bowl in American history. Have you guys ever wondered where football really got its start from? Well, it may interest you to know that football actually didn't develop in America. It has its roots in England. It is a descendant of rugby. Football is a very popular sport, and that's why I thought it is important to touch on this subject. In fact, according to Bill Carter of the New York Times, in the last 17 minutes of the game, there were 113.9 million viewers tuned in. That was up from 111.3 million just the year before. So it's an amazingly popular sport. In this presentation, I'm going to tell you about how American football originated in England and evolved in America, about Walter Camp and why he is considered the father of American football, and tell you a little bit about how modern day football has evolved since it got its start. So where exactly did American football get its start? Well, sports using balls, goals, and feet have been around for thousands of years. In fact, in the 17th century in colonial America, Europeans were known to play sports with inflated balls. Those games evolved over time, and in the 19th century developed into rugby and soccer. In the early 19th century, many variations of the game of football were made with many different sets of rules. In fact, there was probably a different game with a different set of rules for each individual school. By the mid-19th century, two general types of games had evolved. There was a kicking style game and a running style game. Kicking style like soccer, running style like rugby. It may interest you to know that the kicking style game was actually more popular in America at that time in the early 19th century. And the running style game was more popular in Canada with the Montreal Football Club. On October 20th, in 1873, reps from Yale, Columbia, Princeton, and Rutgers University met to develop standard rules. Like I said, there were many variations of rules up until that time, so that is when the schools finally came together to meet to develop standard rules so they could compete within each other. Now that I've discussed where American football got its start, I think it's important to let you know who is credited as being the father of American football and why. Walter Camp, this gentleman right here, is credited with being the father of American football because he revolutionized the way the game was played. He attended Yale University and played every sport that the school offered. He later became a coach at that same school, coaching football. He regularly attended the Massasoit House Convention to establish the standard rules for the game of football. Some of the rules that he developed were the line of scrimmage and the down and distance rules. And those were very unique because those never existed prior to that time. That's very unique to football. He also made rules for the length of the game and for the dimensions of the field, further developing a standard for American football. The game continued to evolve over the years, but Camp is regarded as the most important figure in American football. The game continued to change and to grow throughout the years, and rule changes are still being discussed. American football has continued to evolve since it's got its start. Since the start, the amount of points, the dimensions of the field, the length of the game, and many other factors have been changed and standardized. It continued to grow in popularity, and many more colleges over the years were developing football teams. In 1920, the American Professional Football Association was formed. 2 years later, it changed to the National Football League, NFL. In 1960, the American Football League, the AFL, was formed. As you can see here, NFL and AFL logos. The two merged in 1969. Before merging, the two different football leagues met in competition. It was the Kansas City Chiefs and the Green Bay Packers, and they competed in what came to be known as the first Super Bowl in 1967. The Packers won that game 35-10. Since then, rules continued to change. A few examples are in 1970, they started putting last names on jerseys. In 1997, they made a rule stating that players could not take their helmets off while on the field except during timeouts and in between quarters. And in 2001, they changed the rule for fumble recoveries, awarding the recovery at the spot where the fumble was recovered rather than at the spot where the momentum of the player carried it. The NFL is still discussing rule changes. One example is changing the kickoff. They are discussing whether to get rid of the kickoff completely or just change it up. According to Kareem Copeland, a writer for Around the League, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coach Greg Schiano offered a scenario where instead of kickoffs, teams can punt after a score or attempt to convert a 4th and 15 to keep the ball. So the sport is still changing even today. In conclusion, we went over the roots of football and how football got its start in England originally. We talked about Walter Camp and his contributions to the sport, and we discussed some of the ways that football has evolved even up until now. It's weird to think that something as American as football, it has its origins in another country. It's even weirder to know that the kicking variation of football, closely related to soccer, was at one point more popular than the running style variation. Football is now the most popular sport in America, with the last Super Bowl having had the most viewers tuned in nationwide than any other event in history. Football may have been born in England, but it was raised in America. Thank you all for listening. That is my informative speech on the origins of football.